first thing that you have to know about gender is that gender is self-identified. So till this point, the child had no say in it. So at the time of birth, the parents pick the sex. In the first few years, or even before birth, let's say, so chromosomes decide sex at the time of conception. Hormones decide sex in the fetal life. So when the testes are formed, when the ovaries are formed, when the secondary sexual characteristics are formed, the hormones decide. At the time of birth, parents decide. After birth, society decides. Right? So chromosomal sex, gonadal sex, phenotypic sex. Parents decide gender at birth. Society decides how the gender should be in the first few years. The person gets a choice much later. How do you identify yourself? So when I ask you, what is your gender? You will say something. Male, female, transgender. You will say something. Why do you say that? So for now, let's keep transgender aside and let's just talk of male and female. You will identify yourself as a particular gender because you could have, or rather you do have, a genital gender. This is something you identify with. You will look at your own body. You will see your secondary sexual characteristics and you will correlate that, saying that if I have a vagina, I must be a woman. If I have breasts, I must be a woman. If I don't have a vagina, in fact, I have a penis. If I have a mustache, if I'm muscular, if I'm tall, then I must be a man. This is genital gender. You look at your own body and you draw conclusions from it. Second is gender identity. This is your inherent sense of are you a man or a woman. Now, this is very tricky because that inherent sense comes from social conditioning. A part of it, some aspects of it come from social conditioning, but nevertheless, inside, when you ask yourself, what do you identify with? Forget about your body. What do you identify with? That is gender identity. There is something called as gender role, which is not just your sense of self, but how you behave. So this is gender behavior. So if I am a man, I am supposed to behave in a particular way. Now, this again is very contextual. There are different societies, there are different cultures that expect different things from their men and women. But for a particular person, in that particular society, gender role is part of your gender identity. So who you are is what you do. And sexual identity is taken as separate because sexual identity refers to gender identity plus sexual orientation. So this we will take right after this. But first, let's just understand the concept of gender itself. Roughly, you can think of gender as a triangle between what genitalia you have, your internal sense, and outward expression. All these three put together will form your gender. So from a traditional viewpoint, okay, I'm specifying that from a traditional viewpoint, if someone says that, what's your gender? I'm a man. The traditional viewpoint is that right from conception, they are chromosomally 46XY. They have testosterone, they have testes, they have penis, scrotum, which are the secondary sexual characteristics. They identify as male. So they inherently feel that they are male. Society identifies them as male. They behave in a way that is masculine, which again, it is what society decides what masculinity should be. They behave according to that, and they are sexually attracted to women, females. Now, all of this is what we take as a package when someone says, I'm a man. So all of this we assume when someone identifies themselves as a man. And similarly, when someone identifies themselves as female, we assume that this must be 46XX, they have an ovary or a uterus, they have the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, that they have breasts, their secondary sexual characteristics, low voice, even behavior in a particular way, that they identify as a female, that society accepts them as female, they behave in a feminine way, and they are sexually attracted to males. So this is the grouping that we do when someone says that they are a woman. And this is how we have managed to classify the whole world. So just think of this. A population of 7 billion people, we have managed to classify into this very neat categorization of man and woman, and a classification that satisfies all these criteria. You don't have to explain it. Just saying that I'm a man is enough. Society will assume all these things. And this has been the traditional viewpoint. What is the problem with this? Why? And this is not long ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Till then, this was the traditional viewpoint. Although, interestingly, a lot of societies have known that this classification doesn't work, because there are people who don't fit into one of them, or who fit into both of them. This was known, but it was easier to ignore that because our understanding wasn't there. We didn't know how to explain it. And in general, throughout history, throughout evolution, whatever we can't understand, we will dismiss, unless it is dangerous to us, in which case we will kill it. So what can go wrong in this? What is wrong with this classification? There are variations. So we've spoken about chromosomal, we've spoken about chromosomal sex, we've spoken about gonadal sex, we spoke about phenotypic sex, and we spoke about gender. Now, where can variations occur from this straight line, from this beautiful straight line that we have drawn? Like, it starts from one and has to go to the other. All these things have to be covered. Where can variations happen? Well, it turns out that it can happen at every level. At every step, the road can take a detour. And this is what makes understanding gender so complicated, so difficult, because it is not easy. It is not easy to think about all the variables, especially compared to the alternative, which is just two. Binary. People love binary. Man ya woman. Khatam. You don't have to think. But that's not the truth. So this is why gender conversations are difficult. Every time there is a variation, it used to be called disorders. Disorders of sexual differentiation, or DSDs. And nowadays that word disorder is being removed, but still it is there in a lot of in a lot of textbooks still, and the incidence is almost 1 in 4500 or 1 in 5000, which, if you think about it, isn't that rare, because 1 in 5000 would mean that, I mean, in Bombay, every street has more than 5,000 people. In fact, a housing society may have 5,000 people, a big one. So that is not that rare. And if you are going to put that many people in a classification that doesn't accept them, then that is a problem. So then that onus is on us to understand what is happening. 46XX or 46XY. These are the traditional ones. You can have chromosomes that are more. So for example, if there is one extra X chromosome, okay, so then that means XXY. So that would make it 47XXY. This is called as Klinefelter, which is a syndrome. You can have one chromosome less. So you could have something like one X-lex. So that would make it 45X, which is called as Turner's syndrome. Now, these are two examples. A 47XXY, which means that just one X chromosome extra, this person would be phenotypically male, but there will be problems. So there may be small testes, there may be tall stature, but there will be hypogonadism, so less amount of testosterone, and this is actually seen in around 1 in 1000 men. And the strangest or the saddest thing is that almost 75% of cases may not be diagnosed, and they will just live their lives not knowing why they are going through this. And they may only be diagnosed if there is a problem like infertility, which there will be, but if they come and take treatment, and they may be just embarrassed that my sexual organs aren't big, or that I'm not able to have children, and they will just dismiss it because the families will not want to talk about it, and they will just be considered that this is something let's just ignore, because like I said, anything you don't understand or that you don't like, we tend to ignore. And this is why a lot of them are not diagnosed. Turner syndrome, usually phenotypically female, so they have female secondary sexual characteristics, but there will be some problems. So there is something called a streak gonad. So the ovaries are very small, estrogen levels are low, their menstrual cycles are not proper, and they can have other problems like heart problems, cardiac problems. And this is seen in 1 in 2000 women. Again, not that uncommon. There can be something called as Mosaicism. So you could have a mix. So you could either have 45X or 46XY mosaics. So what is Mosaicism? The mosaic pattern. You may have seen certain bathrooms having those different tiles. So one tile is colored, one tile is not. So this is called as mosaic. So similarly, there are different cells in the body, and some cells have 46XY, some cells have 45X. So this is called as a mosaic pattern, and there can be many different types of mosaics. So different combinations of cells can happen. And the problem here is that not all cells behave in the same way. So this can lead to a huge spectrum of physical features. So some have male phenotype, some have female phenotype, some have ambiguous genitalia. So this term you may have heard. So when that child is born and that doctor or the parents pick the child up, they can't tell if this is a boy or a girl because there is ambiguous genitalia. So either the penis is too small, or you could have secondary sexual characteristics of a woman, but then there is something wrong in it. So the parents are not sure, and traditionally this was called as intersex. So intersex is defined as any gender, or rather any sex at birth that doesn't fit neatly into one of these two binaries. So if it's not an obvious male or an obvious female at birth, it falls under intersex. And it is an umbrella term. It is a term that is used for the lack of a better term, because now the more we know, the more we realize that intersex doesn't really explain anything. So intersex has a lot of variations inside it. So there are a lot of combinations like mosaics that can present with ambiguous genitalia, and this leads to something called as sex of rearing, which means the parents will now decide, should I raise this child as a boy or girl? And then what happens is, if they decide that it should be a boy, then they will undergo surgery so that the secondary sexual characteristics resemble a boy, or secondary sexual characteristics resemble a girl. Or if they can't afford surgery, they will just raise the child as a boy or a girl and just hope for the best. And think of the amount of conflict that that child will go through, because when I said that gender means all of this, genital gender, gender identity, gender role, their genital gender is completely messed up because they will not be sure of what they are, and their gender identity is something that their parents have chosen for them, and they will not know what to behave as, and gender role is something that society is choosing for them. So at some point there will be a lot of conflict, which is why the levels of depression are much more in these people. So it is important for us to know what is happening and why it is happening. So this is all that can happen in chromosomal sex. Now, very quickly, even in gonadal sex or in phenotypic sex, a lot of things can be varied. So there can be variations. Gonadal sex, testes and ovary may not develop. Even if your chromosome is proper, even if your chromosome is 46XX or 46XY, it may be that in the middle, something is missing, something is off track, some hormone is missing, some gene has a problem. So then your testes or your ovary may not develop. This could be called testicular agenesis or ovarian agenesis, ovarian dysgenesis. There are multiple names. Suppose your testes and ovaries are okay. What about your hormones? So what about, say, testosterone or estrogen? So it could be that there is no testosterone or no estrogen, the hormone itself is missing, or if you remember what I said about every hormone needing a receptor, what if there is no receptor? So the testosterone is there, but when the testosterone goes to attach itself to something, there is no receptor, there is no lock. So this is called as a receptor problem. What if there is a receptor, but that receptor is unable to take up the testosterone? So there is testosterone, there is receptor, but that hormone is not sensitive to the receptor. This is called as androgen insensitivity syndrome. And this is something you may have heard of, I'm not sure, but this is when somebody has androgen. So androgen is testosterone. So think about this. Somebody has 46XY. So chromosomally male. They have testes. So gonadal sex is male. Their testosterone is present. So hormonally male. But testosterone is unable to act. So if testosterone is unable to act, then that means that there are your secondary sexual characteristics are all female, which means that they will not have or they will have less amount of hair. So axillary hair, pubic hair, all that will be less. Their height, voice, behavior, everything will be female. They will identify as female, because when the child is born, the external appearance will be of female. So there will be a vagina, and the person's behavior will be female because the parents will raise that child as a female, and that person will identify as a female, but there will be no uterus and there will be no ovary. So that means that that person can never have a child. So there is infertility. And a lot of times these women will only find out about this once they are older, once they get married, once they're trying to have kids. Then they will look, why am I not able to have kids? Then they'll do an ultrasound and find that, of course, I can't have kids, I don't have a uterus. And then they will do a genetic test and they will find out that my chromosome is XY. Think about the conflict that such a person would go through, having gone through their entire life as female, to find out that they're chromosomally and gonadally male. This is when phenotypic sex can undergo a variation. And finally, there can be variation in gender. If you enjoyed learning neuroscience of sexuality, then do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click that bell icon so that you can get a notification the next time I upload a video. Thank you.